I'm working on a new video editing system. This one is in the NCase M2, and it's going to involve pairing a simpler air cooler with a 9950X, and we're going to see how well that can work. Welcome to Machines and More. So the last time I had an mATX based build for my production system was over 10 years ago. I've used mini-itx boards after that, and this is going to be a changer, so excited to show you this one. All right, so this is the NCase M2. I haven't built in this case for a while, but it's a very special case. It is a small form factor case, a smaller footprint. I've been working in the NCase M3 with a 285K in the custom build you've seen recently, but I wanted to go just experiment with something a little bit smaller and an mATX board. But one of the important reasons for going with the mATX board is I need a 10G Ethernet adapter card. And I can do that with an mATX board because it'll have a slot for the GPU and also a smaller slot here for the 10GE card that I have. The board here is MSI's MPower B850. This is a specialized memory overclocking board. Not going to be doing too much memory overclocking with this. I'll probably push this kit a little bit harder than the rated spec. This is the 64 gigs of CL36 6000 megahertz. And one of the neat things about this board is that it just has a ton of M.2 space here. You got 2 slots here, and then I've got another one because it only has 2 DIMMs. I've also got another spot here for a 3rd one. And this slot's going to be really easy to access in the future, so I'm pretty happy with how this board is set up here. Primary drive over here. That's going to be this BiWin 2 terabyte. And over on the back is another spot for a 4th drive. So that's 4 M.2s in total. Got the 9950X here installed in this board. It's going to be a workhorse CPU. Power supply here is the ROG Loki. It's a 750 watt unit. Should be good enough for what we're doing. It's just one that I had handy. The 850 watt one that would have been better for this build is still in the other build. So we'll maybe walk that over later on, but this'll do for now. I have noticed that the fan curve on this is pretty good. The SFXL form factor means that we're running 120 millimeter fan, so that's naturally going to have a better noise profile if and when the fan comes on. So in the M2, the easy way to cool a power-hungry CPU like the 9950X is going to be using a 280 AIO, or even a 240 would be better than this. But I was curious to see how much we could push the CPU cooler that I have here. This is the Noctua D12L. It's a Chromax version of this, and I'm only going to use a single fan on here because that's probably the best setup that I can go with in here. I can't put an outboard fan because the RAM is going to push the height of the fan above the case's width, and normally for something like this, I think NCase M3 might be a little bit more suitable just because it has more width and we can run a bigger cooler like the D15G2. But, we'll just play around with it and see what we can do. And then I'll talk about some of the optimizations that we can do to make this serviceable. And we'll set it up as a rear intake. Of course, I'm not going to be putting a fan at the back here because I think the 92 millimeter size would limit what we can get out of the 120 millimeter fan here. All right, GPU here. This is the Asus ProArt 5080. And it's a very, very nice card. Very powerful card. Perfect for a video editing setup like this. High-end video editing setup. And paired with a 9950X should handle any footage without any issues. Here I'll show you why this board actually makes a lot of sense compared to a mini-itx board. So there's 3 10GA ports, 4 5GA ports. There's one 10G port and a 20G port. So that should be sufficient for what I do. I don't use too much high-speed external storage. And what I was using the Thunderbolt port on my previous mini-itx board was to connect a 10G adapter. So now that I have this 10G card here, and I don't really need that, so this should be sufficient to connect like an external M.2 enclosure. You have Wi-Fi 7 here. The board does have a 5G port, but 10G, that's faster. But now I have 2 ports if I need it. And then flash, BIOS, clear seamless button, pretty handy here. So this board, excellent. And it's not, it's fairly cost effective too. The thing about using the D12L in the NCase M2 is that the side panel does not clear. So the heat pipe tips, they're kind of, sit right here and it can kind of get through. This one seems like it has no issue once I attach it. So what I've done is I've marked off the spots where the heat pipe tips interfere. I'm just gonna go and remove some material with the Dremel, and then we'll fit this back on. Still have to touch it up a little bit to make it look a little bit more polished, probably just paint it in or whatever, Sharpie or whatever. But that is what you need to do in order to get this to clear the cooler heat pipe tips. For this one, we'll go with the Chromax A14G2 from Noctua. That'll fit right here. So that's the fan installed, the A14G2 here. I ran the cable down through here so you can't really see it going towards the main board. And this is an inverted build. So I'm gonna put the side panel back on. With the M2, the side panels sit in the slot like that. And then that's how we'll close it up. The GPU is gonna be at the top for the cleanest intake path. Okay, so I got it all set up. It's not uneventful, actually, because I had some difficulty getting it to post reliably until I flashed the latest BIOS, and I think the original 2025 one was a little buggy. Got it mostly optimized at this point, so I can show you how the 9950X is working with the D12L. Now, there's still something a little funky going on when you shut down in Windows and try to start it back up again. It gets stuck on the DRAM debug LED, but if you unplug and then start it back up, it's totally fine. So I'm still trying to figure that out. It seems perhaps it's memory training related. I checked out Power Options Windows and disabled memory context restore. Haven't quite figured it out yet, but I think it'll be okay. The temps, it's not as bad as I thought it would be at stock. The full power is about 200 watts with the 9950X, so it's no slouch. Temps were in the low 90s, so it wasn't quite throttling back yet, but it's not optimal, and it just gives minimal headroom. So in the board BIOS, what I'm going to do is dial in an undervolt, and I'm going to do a power limit, and that's going to be under PBO advanced settings, precision boost overdrive. Now I've done some testing in the past with the 9950X 3D, and this is very similar. And I'll leave that linked if you want a more granular walkthrough on the experimentation process. But long story short, I'm targeting 150 watts here to get to close to stock performance. If I can get 95% of the stock performance from a more powerfully cooled build and also run at 75% of this stock CPU PPT, I'm happy with that. So what I'm gonna do here, I've dialed in 150 watts. This is pretty much gonna be the bottleneck, so I don't need to do the TDC or the EDC. And then I've upped the boost clock override 200 megahertz higher. That's gonna allow the CPU clocks to float higher up to that. And that's not guaranteed that it'll do that, just lifts the ceiling. And then the curve optimizer here, that's what's gonna allow me to do the dynamic undervolting. One thing, you can't just be dialing those numbers in blindly. You do need to test incrementally and work down to more negative offsets. And I've already done that in OCCT, and negative 25 was testing out just fine. And I actually went to negative 30 and that tested stable, but I didn't see much of a gain there. So just for reference, but minus 25 is where I'm going to stick to. As with all overclocking or undervolting, your mileage may vary. So this is not a guaranteed, just reference point for you. So when we boot back in with these settings, you can see the temps, they're going to be much more manageable. Of course, they're going to continue to climb a little bit, but air cooler like this does saturate pretty quickly. And you're going to see this is going to be a pretty decent score. 9950X on liquid cooling can get 41K to 42K at stock settings here, almost 40K. It's not too bad considering that we were at 75% of stock power. Under render temps here, the CPU temp now at 150 watts. It's very manageable here. Now I might even be able to up it to 160 watts and then go a little beyond the original stock performance with this setup. Now doing a benchmark for resolve gets us a pretty good score, so I'm very confident this will handle my typical workload, no sweat. Now, not too long ago, I had been using a similar setup with a 5080 and a 14600K. And you can see, although the same GPU here, the CPU uplift still yields a good boost here. Now, the standard and basic scores are going to be where the GPU is not utilized as much because I think it's testing the non-studio version of DaVinci Resolve, which is going to be using the CPU a lot more. But the studio version that I use heavily relies on the GPU and is optimized for that. Now, I built this up as a production system, but it would also be a decent gaming setup. Now, I wouldn't use the CPU for a gaming focus setup. The 9700X or 9800X would be much more appropriate there, but this production system, but still, it's like having a 9700X, right? So CPU temps are getting impacted by the running GPU though. The side fan does seem to help mitigate that, but the placement of this case is now definitely important because it's exhausting out the side. And I originally had it on my left side and it was blowing all the hot air at me. So it was very uncomfortable. So I'm gonna switch that to the other side. All right, so other things about this, having that second expansion slot for the 10G card to be built in is very nice. It would be nicer if the board had it built in, but that's feature is still fairly niche. The 5G on board that the board comes with may be more than enough for a lot of folks, and it is actually quite nice that it's featured on this board. And also the 4 M.2 slots, the one next to the RAM is awesome because I needed a Papa drive, and it was super easy to access that one. It's easily worth it. In lieu of the, the 2 DIMMs, unless you actually need 4 slots, right? One thing I did end up going back and adding an additional EPS cable. I figured, why not, right? The board supports it, and you don't really need it. At first, I was a little wary of having extra cable clutter, but after doing that, it doesn't really seem to add that much. Now, this board does have 12 60 amp V-core stages. There are only 60 amp stages, but it's really nice to have 12 stages. And it's perfectly fine with even overclocking this chip, which I'm not. The kicker with these features is that this is still a $200-ish board. So I think mATX in this scenario, even though it has some limitations for case fans and such, it's actually quite a good trade-off. So yeah, so far pretty excited about this one. It's going to be an excellent companion, and maybe I will, ultimately liquid cool it at some point. But I kind of like the simplicity of this for a work system. Easy to maintain and tweak if something goes wrong, and I will leave all the links for the build parts down below. Please give a like and make sure you're subbed, since you'll get to enjoy the work that this guy helps create, right? So thanks for following along. I'll see you in the next one.